Hello Year 9s, we're nearly at the end of our business plans project. We've just got a couple more weeks worth of work to do. Next week you're going to spend time actually putting your complete business plan together. So this is the last component now of your business plan, which will all come together next week. So this week what we're looking at is risk assessment and contingency planning. Now, risk assessment is all about thinking what could go wrong, because you could come up with a brilliant business idea, you could have a good idea of how much you can make and have good profit margins for making lots of money with your business idea. You could feel confident that you don't have much in the way of competition, but then there are always things that can go wrong for a business. Let's take the example of the current coronavirus situation. Businesses up and down the country have had to cope with the problem of coronavirus. Some businesses will close down because of having had to shut down for a long period of time with the coronavirus, and then reopening with more stringent conditions for how many customers they can have in at any one time, and so on. So it's really important for businesses to think about what could go wrong and to put in what we call contingency plans to decide how they will deal with those things if they do go wrong. Now, obviously, things like the coronavirus, very hard to predict, or even if you might predict that they could happen, you might think, well, they're so unlikely that actually we're not going to put in any contingency plans for that. But other things, other more common things that could happen to a business, it is really important to make sure that you've planned for those. So let's think about what you need to do for a risk assessment and contingency planning. There are 3 steps. Step 1 is to actually identify your risks. Now, for your project, for your business plan, what I want you to do is do a mind map or a list of as many things as you can think of that could go wrong for your business. And it's probably even a good idea to see if somebody else can help you work through that, because actually often in businesses the best risk assessments come from actually a number of people getting their heads together and thinking through the different risks, because one person might think of one thing, another person might think of another thing, and it's important to make as comprehensive a list as you can. So if we take my fudge business example, here are some risks that I've come up with. So there could be shortages of ingredients, particularly in the current coronavirus situation. There have been shortages of various different ingredients in shops, and if I can't get particular ingredients for making my fudge, I can't make the fudge. There could actually be cost increases on those ingredients, and that could mean that affects how profitable my business is, or the price that I can afford to sell the fudge for. I could end up making poor quality fudge. I could have inconsistent results. There could be one batch of fudge that comes out really well and another batch of fudge just isn't good, either because of the flavour or the consistency of the fudge. I could actually end up giving people food poisoning from my fudge, or people could have allergies that actually flare up from eating my fudge. So that's a risk. I could have a situation of staff illness. Now, in my example, I'm planning on making the fudge and selling the fudge, so I'm the only member of staff, but what happens if I'm ill? What impact might that have on my business? There could be changes to food regulations that might prevent me from being able to sell my fudge. Remember, I'm planning on setting out a stall outside my house for people to come and buy fudge from. What if the government put in laws that said that I'm not allowed to do that, or I've got to follow particular more stringent rules in order to be able to do that? At the moment, I don't think there are any really big rules that would stop me from being able to do it, but those sorts of regulations could come in. There could be wet weather. I'm planning on putting a table outside, fudge in paper bags. If it starts raining, then those paper bags are going to get wet, the fudge is going to get wet, nobody's going to want to buy them. Also in wet weather, I'm going to have fewer customers passing by anyway. If I don't get wet weather, there could also be hot weather, and sugary, buttery fudge could melt into a sticky mess in hot weather, and then again people aren't necessarily going to want to buy it. It's going to soak through the paper bag and not be a very good product, a very attractive looking product for people to buy. Now, because I'm planning on putting out an unmanned stall outside my house, I'm not planning on standing out there looking after the fudge stall all the time. I'm just going to put bags of fudge on a table and a box for people to put their money in. There is a danger, a risk, that either fudge or cash from the cash box or both could actually be stolen by passers-by. So that's a risk that I need to think about. And finally, there may be others that start to sell fudge as well. So therefore I might start to have competition. What if a neighbour a few doors down thought, that's a good idea, but I think I can make better fudge than that, and started selling fudge nearby to me. So, having identified the risks, step 2 is to then assess those risks, to think about how severe they are, how big a problem it would be if those things actually happened. And so the way I want you to do that is to give each risk either a red, an amber, or a green. Okay, where red is something that would be really serious if it happened, amber something of medium risk, green things that won't be particularly serious or are very unlikely to happen. So going around my list of risks, first of all, ingredients shortages. I've decided that's going to be an amber risk. At the moment, particularly in the coronavirus situation, there's a fairly high likelihood of ingredients shortages, but it's not going to have catastrophic consequences on my business if there are some ingredients shortages, provided I can fairly soon get those ingredients, or I can look for alternative sources for those ingredients. It might cost me a little bit more, but it's not going to be a major disaster for my business if I can't get hold of enough ingredients. Perhaps what I need to do is actually plan to buy enough ingredients to last me a reasonable length of time. Cost increases is the next one. I've decided that's a green. I'm not seeing that much increase in costs in the shops at the moment. If there is an increase in cost, I don't think it's going to make a massive difference to how much it costs me to make my fudge and therefore what I can sell for. And if cost increases do go quite high, I can just notch up the prices a little bit. What about poor quality fudge? Well, I'm putting that as an amber. If I make fudge that isn't very good, then people aren't going to come back and buy more fudge from me. It's probably not going to cause the business to fail, provided I can actually rectify that fairly quickly. What about food poisoning or allergies? Well, I'm saying that is a high risk. That's a big risk, because if I do cause people food poisoning, or if I do cause people's allergies to flare up, then that could have a major consequence for those people, and therefore a major consequence as well for my business and the reputation of my business, or possibly even people suing me. So that I'm labelling as a high risk. Staff illness, I'm labelling as a medium risk. If I'm ill, I'm not going to be able to make fudge, or if I do make fudge while I'm ill, I could also cause people to have food poisoning or cause other problems, pass on my illness to other people. So that's going to be a moderate risk for me. Changes to food regulations, I don't think that's a big risk, because I don't think it's very likely that food regulation changes are going to come in anytime soon. They're going to have a major impact on me. I'm only a very, very small business, so I don't think the government is going to be particularly bothered about the sort of things that I'm doing. Wet weather, I'm putting down as a moderate risk. It could have an impact on my sales if I end up losing some fudge to wet weather because it gets ruined by being rained on. So that's a moderate risk, but it's not going to be the end of the world for me. Similarly, hot weather, again, some stock could become unusable, but it's not going to be the end of the world. And similarly, if cash or fudge is stolen, it's going to have a moderate consequence on me, because it's going to cut the amount of profit that I make. I'm going to lose money from it, but again, it's not a big severe problem like the food poisoning. And then others starting to sell fudge, I'm not sure that that's very likely at all. If it is likely, if it is going to happen, then I think the sort of quantities that I'm selling, I think I'm hopefully still going to be able to manage to sell a reasonable quantity of fudge anyway. So that's how I'm assessing my risks. You might assess them slightly differently to me if you were looking at the same set of risks. And it is a subjective thing, which is again another reason why it's good to have a number of different people doing it rather than just one person assessing the risks on their own, because then you can agree and disagree and come to a consensus on these different risks. Okay, so that's step 2. Finally, step 3 is to put in contingency planning. So contingency planning is where you say, okay, what am I going to do to try and prevent these risks from happening, or try to reduce the risk of them happening? Okay, now there's no point in contingency planning on really low level risks, because contingency plans always cost money or time to put in place. So you only tend to put in contingency plans for the higher level risks. So what I want you to do is to choose 3 of the biggest risks that you have for your business that you've identified and make contingency plans for those. So the 3 that I'm going to choose are obviously the food poisoning and allergies one, because that's my highest risk. And then I'm also going to think about what I'm going to do to try to reduce the risk or prevent the risk of theft and of damage to stock because of hot weather. So first of all, food poisoning. What could I do? Well, I need to make sure that I follow good hygiene standards when making the fudge. I can make sure I avoid overhandling the fudge with my hands and not breathing on the fudge and things like that, so that then there's less risk of passing on any illness that I might be about to get and have germs for. I'm going to make sure that I don't make any fudge if I'm unwell, that I only make fudge when I'm feeling well. I'm going to ensure that all the ingredients that I use are in date and stored correctly. So butter is stored in the fridge, it's in date. Sugar is stored in a dry cupboard, and so on. I'm going to make sure that when I've made the fudge, I'm storing it in the fridge or in a cool place afterwards to make sure that it doesn't go off too quickly. I'm going to make sure I make the fudge in small batches to avoid keeping it for too long before I end up selling it, because if the fudge has been kept for too long, there's more risk that it might have developed germs and potential food poisoning. And on the allergy side of things, I'm going to make sure that there's a clear list of ingredients, particularly highlighting the common allergens that there are in my fudge, clearly displayed where the fudge is being sold. So for example, there's butter in my fudge, so therefore that's dairy products. Some people are allergic to dairy, and so therefore that's one of the things that I need to show clearly on the ingredients. Okay, what about hot weather? What am I going to do to try to reduce the risks from hot weather? Well, I can't prevent the hot weather. That's going to happen or not happen. I can't do anything about that. But what I can do is make sure that I only put out a few bags of fudge at a time, so that if that fudge does start to melt because of hot weather, I've not lost that much. I can make sure then that all the other fudge, particularly in hot weather, is kept inside the fridge, not just in a cupboard. Or alternatively, I could actually put the fudge out on the stall in a cool box, so then it's less likely to melt while it's out there. Of course, that does mean it's less on display, so people are less likely to see it if it's in a cool box rather than out in bags. But I could put labels, I could put pictures out to show that there is fudge there, and invite people to look in the cool box to get the fudge if they want to help themselves. What about the risk of fudge or cash being stolen? Well, again, if I only put out a few bags of fudge at a time, then I can't have much of my stock stolen at any one time. It does mean that I will need to go out at regular intervals to replenish those bags of fudge. I need to also make sure that I empty my cash box at regular intervals, so I'm not leaving lots of money out there for people to steal. That will reduce the risk of me losing money from people stealing it. Alternatively, I could go for the high-tech solution of installing a webcam, positioned watching from an upstairs window, and then signs out on my stall warning people that CCTV is in operation. And then I could put more money out, more fudge out. But actually perhaps the simpler solution of putting out fewer bags of fudge and making sure I'm emptying that cash box regularly is the better solution. Okay, so 3 steps that you need to follow this week. Step 1, identify your risks. Try to be specific as possible and identify around about 10 different risks in a mind map or a list that your business could face. Try to make sure it's specific to your business, not just general risks that could apply to any business. Step 2, assess the risks. Give them a red, amber or green based on whether you think they're a high risk, medium risk or low risk for your business. And also in the Word document as a could task, I've got some information about how you can actually go about scoring the risks in a more scientific way, and that's a way that often people use in more detailed risk assessments. And finally, step 3, contingency planning for 3 of your higher level risks. I want you to put in place what plans you would make to make sure that that risk doesn't happen, or to reduce the consequences of that risk should it happen. Okay, so those are the things that you need to do this week. I look forward to seeing your work.